There probably is not a country in the world where people do not have mental health problems, and the UK is no exception. 1 in 4 people here suffering from some kind of mental illness. Well, this month, the UK government held the world's very first global ministerial health summit to bring politicians and experts together. There was some controversy, and there are accusations that the UK is failing ethnic minorities. Yes, here in the United Kingdom there are concerns that there's quite a lot of stigma and lack of awareness in ethnic minority communities when it comes to mental health. So, do health services also need to change how they are treating such patients?
Mental health has become a global issue. But when it comes to health care, not all are treated equal. Black, Asian and minority ethnic patients face ongoing discrimination when accessing mental health services in the UK. So why are there disparities when accessing treatment? Reports over recent years have found that Black, Asian and minority ethnic patients face consistent mistreatment. When compared with the majority of the white population, they are more likely to be admitted to psychiatric hospitals, detained under the Mental Health Care Act and experience poor treatment outcomes. In the UK, 1 in 4 suffer mental health problems.
For too long, mental illness has been something of a hidden injustice in our country, shrouded in a completely unacceptable stigma and dangerously disregarded as a secondary issue to physical health.
In response, the UK government held the world's first global ministerial health summit in a shift to bring together influential and political leaders. But should the UK position itself as a global leader in mental health? Up to 200 signatories wrote a letter condemning the Mental Health Summit because of the discrimination that affects the UK's minority and ethnic communities. Rhianna Walcott, editor of The Colour of Madness, explores Black, Asian and minority ethnic mental health in the UK, including her own story.
I did have one particularly negative experience with a white counsellor where I felt deeply uncomfortable talking about my life because it was clear that she was consistently attributing these issues to my blackness and getting it wrong.
Critics say minority and ethnic mental health is underfunded, which is impacting training practitioners.
Yes, I think that there's definitely a need for further training in terms of cultural sensitivity and not just the kind that we have so far.
But minority groups are also ignoring the problem.
In our communities, we need to have more open discourse about mental health, and that doesn't just start in academic spaces. It absolutely has to be in community centres.
With culturally inappropriate treatment, misdiagnosis and over-medication for Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, do mental health services need to adopt better cultural practices?
And that is what we are here to discuss. I'm pleased to say that joining me at the round table we have Shuranjeet Singh, who's founder of Taraki. He'll explain what that is. Had some mental health problems while studying at Oxford. We also have Tarek, Younis, clinical and cultural psychologist, member of the British Academy. Faisal Mahmood is here, senior lecturer in counselling and psychotherapy at Newman University, that is in Birmingham. Each of you, you watched that story there, but you've got the history of this. You know what's happening. And I just wonder why it's happening. Tarek, you first.
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why it's happening. And I think a lot of the reasons right now has to do with globalization. There's a lot more minority and ethnic representation in terms of service users, but also in terms of professionals. But I think what it comes down to is not necessarily just discussions on how to be competent towards minorities.
Can I strip it back a little bit?
Sure.
Because I'm not the expert in this. Is it that Black and minority ethnic people have more mental health problems, or that their mental health problems are the same as everybody else, they're just not addressed as well?
So I think, again, that's a multifaceted question. There's definitely incidents in which there may be more mental health problems in certain communities. If that's specifically because it belongs to a community, I mean, that's where obviously we have to start addressing issues of class, of marginalization within a community, which may specifically impact their mental health. But not only that, it's also important to mention that people of color are also politicized and racialized when they enter the mental health system. So that, for example, a person of color, a black individual, may be perceived to be perhaps more violent, and therefore will receive an appropriate diagnosis vis-a-vis that prejudice towards the violence.
I mean, is
that's
there
embodied.
evidence of this, or is this just something that you have come to conclude? Is there evidence?
Oh, there's definitely evidence of that, for sure. I mean, we know that, for example, here in the UK, black individuals are much more likely to be sectioned by judges and by police than mental health professionals themselves.
You see, what I'm wondering here, Faisal, is perhaps as a nation, the UK, and by extension other Western countries, what one might like to say, are failing everybody when it comes to mental health. And what we're seeing here is the BAME, black and minority ethnic people saying me, that it isn't necessarily a problem particular to a community, it's a problem particular to a system set up that fails everybody.
I agree. I don't think this is a specific issue just for black and Asian minority groups. I think the lack of resources, lack of funding, and lack of attention given to mental health across the board is a problem. I think there are a couple of really good things recently that UNO decided to kind of consider mental health as a key health issue, and in UK, the kind of some more discussion about the suicide. I think these are some positive steps. But the problem is that there are more specific challenges for ethnic minority groups, regardless of the problems across the different board. I think I completely agree with you, Tarek, that there are in 50s and 60s more so we have seen more black people were diagnosed with serious mental health issues, with psychosis, because of the lack of understanding of the cultural backgrounds, that the pace and the volume of the tone itself considered as aggressive instead of understanding the cultural background. So there are those evidences, we know that. But the issue is extremely complex, really, partly because there are issues not just with the service delivery and the service providers and NHS and mental health services, it's also within the community, the acceptability of and recognizing their own mental health issues. There's a huge stigma, not just coming externally, but internalized stigma associated with mental health.
So let me ask you as a counsellor, because you have people who have problems sitting in front of you, would you have to adopt a different approach to somebody from my background as to, say, somebody from a Pakistani background, an Egyptian background, a black background, purely on the basis of where they've come from?
Well, I wouldn't say I would apply a different approach, but I would have a different attitude. I think I'll allow myself to think that how somebody's color, race, religion, possibly impacting them. And I think that is the problem, the attitude change and the culture change in understanding. I think the problem I've seen over the years that most organizations and service providers, they have a very tokenistic approach when it comes to diversity. I mean, I think people need to understand that diversity is more than talking about or eating samosas and hummus, and not just about the celebrations of differences. I think people shy away from the difficult discussions of differences. I think it's a very primitive human condition to feel uncomfortable or have some kind of fear of the other.
Yeah.
And it's about exploring how it impacts me or others, the differences between us.
Let's hear from somebody. Sorry to leave it until now, but I mean, you're very welcome to join in any time you like. Let's hear from somebody, yourself, who experienced mental health problems and felt you could not get them addressed in the current system when you were studying at Oxford. Okay, start at the beginning. What, if you don't mind being personal about it, I mean, what happened?
So I'd been born and raised in quite a small, close-knit Punjabi Sikh community in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And when the time for university came, you know, we were applying, I was looking outside of Birmingham. And I moved out of the city to study for my undergrad degree. And at that time, there arose many questions of assimilation, questions of identity, that over time had a real impact on me and how I understood myself, how I perceived my place at university, how this contrasted in many ways with my identity that I held back at home. And what this did, this created a lot of difficulties for myself, and it manifested itself mainly through very debilitating social anxiety. And at the time, it became very difficult for me to spend longer than a couple of minutes with my course mates. I would avoid many social situations where I thought I would find difficulty. And it led to me being increasingly isolated.
So may I ask you a question? Because it's obviously a long personal story here. Did you feel let down when you went for help on this, or were you unable because of the anxiety? And I know this is very difficult. Were you unable to go and seek the help? In other words, was it there and you couldn't access it because of your condition, or did you try and access it and it was hopeless for somebody of your background?
So for me, there was this perception that I could not go to my friends and my family back home to talk about these difficulties. There was a bit of a block in talking to my parents about this. My family didn't know what I was going through at the time. But I was very lucky because the housemates I was living with, there were 7 of us, as well as myself, were very open, were very compassionate, and lent a very important listening ear.
Yeah, do you see what I'm driving at? And what I'm trying to work out is, do you feel, as some people have suggested, that there's an institutional problem within the mental health service of dealing with people from different backgrounds, or were you just unable, because of who you are and where you came from and your problem, to go and access a system that was available?
Yeah, so mine wasn't necessarily an issue with accessing the existing system,
Right.
but it was finding structures of support that were in my life at the time, which I couldn't necessarily access back
Okay,
at
we'll
home.
come back to your story in just a moment. This is not a sign of institutional racism as portrayed by people. This is a young man in a hopeless situation who doesn't know, because his community is perhaps not willing to discuss this sort of thing with him, where to go. This is not a sign of institutional racism. Is it in any way, shape or form?
Well, I think it's more complex than to separate that was the institutional racism and the issues within the communities. I think they're interlinked, really. I think people usually shy away from the concept of racism and seeing that as a very emotive word to use. But I think often many service providers would use the term, like, which I find very offensive, the hard-to-reach communities. What it means is, in essence, that there are lots of Black and Asian clients groups who need services, but they're very hard to reach.
But Shuranjeet just said this. You know, he said it was an isolated community, which didn't, I think I've got this right, you didn't sort of know much about the outside world because you've been born and brought up in this very small, isolated, regulating community. It's not necessarily that people don't go in there and try and find out. It's perhaps they can't.
No, exactly. My point is that what the issue is, that hard to access services.
Yeah.
It's not hard to reach client group. And I think that marketing is appalling when it comes to health, especially mental health services. The communication is absolutely appalling. And funding issue is a main issue, I guess. But apart from the funding issue, I think the culture needs to be changed. And I think the recognition of that, how it impacts somebody to be a Black, to be an Asian, to be a Muslim, to be a Sikh person, and live in this community. And on the surface, when we try to celebrate differences...
Catch-22, though, isn't it? I mean, if that community is not reaching out to be a bigger part of the community, it's difficult to understand how you can reach them and what the problems are.
I mean, I think, as was mentioned, it's much more complex than that, because it could very well be, one of the main criticisms towards the mental health services that are provided right now is that they operate on a very Eurocentric model or understanding of what wellness is, what illness is. So it could very well be that communities may be segregating themselves because they don't see that they will receive the adequate services in their understanding of what their health constitutes. And I think it's really important to recognize that when we're talking about institutional racism, we're talking about underlying structures.
That's a word that's used time and time again, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it should be used time and time again, because I think, unfortunately, like, for example, we just spoke right now about stigma, right? And I think right now there's a lot of emphasis on stigma within communities, which prevent individuals from perhaps accessing mental health services. But there's also the stigmatizing of these communities through political rhetoric. For example, in my research and my background, servicing primarily Muslim individuals, it's very well the case that many people come to me because they're afraid of sharing their vulnerabilities in a political climate where those vulnerabilities may potentially be flipped on them and they may potentially feel that stigmatization of, the sort of perhaps Orientalist image of a savage, right? And they don't feel comfortable going to a largely white Eurocentric industry and service where they feel safe to share those vulnerabilities. And I think it's really
I'll ask you
important.
whether the same works in reverse, in negative,
Sure.
in just a moment. But Shuranjeet, let me ask you this one. Did you feel society, here represented by the health service, was letting you down, or was your society letting you down?
I think a lot of this can be answered by looking at mental health awareness campaigns that were ongoing at the time. There was a lot of discussion around male mental health, but what I saw was...
And jolly good that there is, isn't it?
Fantastic that there is, fantastic that there is. And I saw a lot of this discussion happening, but I was still thinking, why hasn't it had an impact on the community I was brought up in?
Because this is only a year ago you founded
Yeah, it was only a year ago. And at the time I
Tarek,
realised...
and you'll tell us about what it is in just a moment.
What I realised was there weren't very many men who were representative of the community I was from talking about these difficulties. And often when I would speak to people back at home, they would say, "Our mental health, that's a white problem." And what I saw was that...
Or is that a macho type of attitude to it? We don't suffer, we don't talk about it, therefore it doesn't exist.
So it's down to many reasons, but one of the reasons was that, there were only celebrities from certain backgrounds who were speaking very openly about their mental health difficulties. And so that gave a reasoning to say, oh, it's a white problem. So one of the things that I was doing, and we'll talk about this moving forward, is trying to balance that out, having different people from different kinds of backgrounds speaking about their mental health experiences to actually make people realize that it's not just a white problem.
So you have a health service, a system with a problem itself because it doesn't quite understand what to do. And you have certain communities who are unwilling to let somebody who might have an inquiring mind in to find out what it is that needs to be done. It's sort of a very difficult problem to solve, isn't it?
I mean, I think it's difficult to use the word unwilling. I think they just may have a different understanding and model of what suffering is.
But what Shuranjeet is actually saying is an awful lot of people in his community would have said, sorry, that's just nothing to do with us.
No, I think it's very important to validate those experiences because I'm not denying that they don't exist.
Sort of thing. No.
Exactly. I'm not denying that there is a lot of stigma within communities with regards to people who may suffer. And there's a lot of intergenerational conflicts with regards to that, between recent migrants, for example, and their children, second generation, third generation. So we know of these issues arising. But I'm just saying that point of access of healthcare, what you're trying to address, isn't only going to be addressed by communities, for example, improving, let's say, in mosques and imams having that sort of mental health awareness and training, which a lot of money and sort of funding ends up going to, and then at the same time neglecting that sort of political rhetoric, which is stigmatizing Muslims.
Let me ask Faisal this one, and I'm not going to inquire too deeply about your client list, but I assume that it is mixed, and that you come across people from all sorts of different backgrounds. Tell me if I'm wrong or right on that one. When it comes to the situation as described by Shuranjeet here, which is of a society to which he is unwilling to take his problems because it might reject the very notion of those problems. It's a machismo type of thing, for want of a better word to describe it. Is that something you recognize?
Absolutely. I think I've many Asian clients would approach me and they kind of tell me the story that they only want to work with somebody who understands their cultural backgrounds. And I think that's quite important factor. I think one of the most common things I've seen that I work with lots of couples, professional couples, and they often avoid to go to a white British therapist in their narrative, saying that they might not be able to understand that how important the family is, that the marriage is not between a man and a woman, for example, in a more heterosexual perspective. It's the marriage of a family. And that's the concept, and I think West usually struggle with, and kind of stigmatize that the having a mother-in-law in the background, how she might be interfering. So that lack of understanding the importance of parents and that kind of the relationship, that it doesn't end when you turn 18. So those complex issues, which are kind of really complex.
But is that something that British Health Service itself could tackle, or is that just...
I think they can tackle.
Only somebody with your roots would be able to understand.
I'm very optimistic, person generally. I think if people are willing on both sides, the NHS and of course the communities needs to address, and Tarek, you kind of touched that, and you also doing a remarkable job, I have to say, that if within the communities and the community champions, they talk about these issues more open. I'd love to see imams coming out, well, not coming out as gay, well, that would be interesting itself, but coming out and talking about their own mental health issues and addressing that. That would be the game changer, I think, and that needs to happen.
Let's hear from Shuranjeet about Taraki. Taraki.
Yeah, Taraki.
Whatever.
Taraki.
It's a year old this month, I
Yes,
believe, and it is a movement that you've put together to do what?
So Taraki, as we've discussed, is born out of my personal experience with
Yeah.
mental health difficulty. It was looking at the community I was born and raised in, and the lack of support for people who are going through difficulties, contrasted with the amazing, compassionate support I had from my housemates at university. And so I saw these structures and I was like, we need this in a community level. So how can we begin changing and reshaping communities to make them better aware and better supporting of people who are going through mental health difficulties? And Taraki in Punjabi and a couple of other South Asian languages, Taraki is the wider verb Taraki karni is to progress. It's to be forward-facing, and as a movement, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to not only make people more aware, make Punjabi communities more educated about mental health, but also make them better at actively supporting people who are going through difficulties.
Are you taking this message to the health professionals as well as to communities?
Yes. So a lot of our work that we're doing is linking together health professionals and communities. So there's an organisation that we're working with called Seek Your Mind, and they are a group of...
I like that.
Yeah, they're a group of Punjabi Sikh mental health professionals. The 3 of them or 4 of them are clinical psychologists, and they have a couple of other assistant psychologists. And a lot of community organisations don't know that these resources exist. And in the short term, it's very much about saying, this is what's on offer, this is what you have. And it's about getting organisations that might not actually know about each other's existence to be working together for their better.
Okay, we're talking about cross-fertilisation here. Or I'm hoping that that's what you're going to say, is that it may just be a Punjabi project at this particular moment, but let's see it spill over into Hindu areas.
Yeah.
Let us see it move into to black areas, Caribbean areas, etc., etc. How would you go about that? I mean, is that an ideal?
Yeah, that's an ideal.
Yeah.
But I think what has almost got us into this difficult position that we're in at the moment is the assumption that there's one policy fits all. One policy fits every single community. And as we mentioned, Taraki is only a year old.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm figuring out what works in
Brilliant.
my experiences. And this is the knowledge that I'm developing, the experiences that I'm having, is something moving forward I want to share with others.
And the one policy fits all approach is also something that's been adopted by those who knock the health service for not understanding that, perhaps. What do you think?
What do you mean by it?
What I mean is it's very easy to sort of say the health service has got this totally wrong, but as Shuranjeet is saying, there's 1,000 different ways of doing this, and you can't blame people for not understanding something that is perhaps a societal problem from this side of the fence rather than from the health services side of the fence.
I think that's very true. And I think it's important that we look at it from these multiple directions. And it can't be this sort of, often it's almost like a political, it sounds, at least to me, as a political tool. Oh, there's this issue, here's a policy, right?
Yeah.
Here we're addressing it just like that. Often completely either neglecting or dismissing service users themselves, right? I mean, we're not even, sometimes the communities themselves are not even addressed or spoken to when, a policy is supposed to improve their access to healthcare. And so I think there's a lot of issues at the moment that need to be addressed, but it comes down to this fact that there isn't this one-size-fits-all.
Absolutely.
And we have to allow for this pluralism in approaches and in understanding.
And, I mean, you're from Birmingham. Yep, you're from Birmingham. Did you two know each other before this programme?
No.
Wouldn't it be brilliant if you two got together and talked about something that could actually take this a stage further? Do you think that's something that could work?
Absolutely. I think I already was thinking of inviting Shuranjeet to come and talk to my students at university and talk about his project, and that's a starting point. I think one thing I want to add to your comment that I think I agree with you that I think the NHS is a representative of what's happening at a more broader level, at a more macro level. I think the whole debate around race, I think it's really, my personal view is that it's kind of really taken a very narrow focus. I think in a room mix of white and black and Asian people, often the race is, or the issue of race is associated with those black and Asian people. Yeah. The issue of race belongs to everyone. And somehow the idea that being white is normal, being white is invisible, and being white is not part of that complex picture, I think that narrative needs to be changed. Being different belongs to everyone in society. And I think I like to see that more and more people, white people, talk about race, talk about being white, and not just present a situation that being white is normal and anything non-white is where the complex
Well,
issues
I
are.
think perhaps you're coming at that from an assumption that that is what an awful lot of white people do think, was being white is not normal. I understand that. Being any colours is normal. Therefore, that's for another programme. I would think the fact that you two are going to get together is absolutely brilliant. Good luck with the group. Good luck with your further studies, and good luck you two.
Thank you.
There are a variety of ways of watching us. If it's not on your TV or on your laptop, you can go to YouTube in the days to come, find this programme, find other versions of Roundtable. TRT World, YouTube, Roundtable. I'm David Foster. Thank you for watching. We hope to have your company next time. Goodbye for now.